One of the things I've always been bothered about with data protection is not somebody actually exfiltrating or stealing the data. I've always been more worried about somebody just going in there and changing it slightly.
You've entered Legal Owl, where sharp legal minds meet the power of strategic intuitive intelligence and inner awareness. Hosted by someone that is a veteran, an author, and is an individual experienced in specialist security operations, strategic intuitive intelligence, and transformational psychology. This is not your typical legal podcast. We explore what most lawyers never say out loud: burnout, grief, inner dissonance, and what it really takes to sustain a legal career with clarity, purpose, and personal alignment. Alongside powerful solo insights, you'll hear thought-provoking conversations with members of the Help Lawyer Network, lawyers, legal support professionals, and expert witnesses, sharing real stories from the front lines. This is the space where law meets what's rarely talked about. Welcome to Legal Owl, where wisdom meets the law and strategic intuitive intelligence guides the way.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world, wherever you are listening to this. This is John from Legal Owl, and thank you for joining me today. Today, I've got a really important guest, actually, and this conversation that we're going to have is a conversation that is needed in this day as we move into beyond 26, from the 26, 27 onwards. The world is changing. Online is changing. The legal industry is changing. Cybersecurity used to be an IT issue, but now it's becoming more of a risk issue and a data issue and a strategic business risk. And I don't claim to be an expert in that field, but I was recently on a podcast with a gentleman by the name of Steve Durbin. I really enjoyed it, and I had to bring him on because he's talked about risks and how the changing paradigm in information security is changing the way that we do business. For the legal industry, mergers, acquisitions, criminal cases, there's so much that is at high stakes and requires knowledge, decision making, and more. So my guest is Steve Durbin. He's the chief executive of the Information Security Forum, and I'm going to bring him on. He's going to discuss. We're going to have a conversation just about the emerging risks in the legal industry. And Steve can let you know a little bit about his work. So I'm going to bring him on now. Steve, welcome to Legal Owl. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Jock. Thanks for having me on.
I'm looking forward to this. Looking forward to this discussion because, as I said at the beginning, cybersecurity has changed. And from our last discussion that we talked about when I was on your podcast, it became clear to me that we perhaps look at cybersecurity in a different way now. It has changed. That we used to just think it was getting hacked and having our information compromised in some way. But now we're moving forward. This becomes a terrorist problem. It becomes a business risk. It becomes so much more. So let's talk a little bit about you and your work that you do, the Information Security Forum, your background, how you got into cybersecurity as the chief executive. And you claim, or your team has claimed, that you're not a security professional in the cybersecurity world, but I would challenge that, bearing the conversation that we had. So I'm glad to have you on, Steve. Please continue.
No, as I say, it's great to talk to you again, Jock. I really enjoyed our last conversation. I'm sitting here smiling. I don't consider myself to be a security professional, and the reason that I say that is my background is very different. My degree was in French literature.
Wow.
So I sort of come to things from that perspective. I started work in the City of London, working with banks, selling computers, moved into consultancy, spent some time with a number of different organizations before moving into security from a position of actually not knowing a huge amount about it. I've been doing a lot of M&A work and that kind of thing, working with fast growth businesses when I was at EY. And I had a phone call one day from a headhunter who said, I think this might be something you'd be interested in. And I said, well, I don't really know anything about it. And he said, that's why I think you should be interested. He said, because it's a really fast growing space. And I know you like that kind of thing. You like change. You don't like to be in an environment where everything is predetermined. He said, so I think you'll find this quite challenging and interesting and fun. So why don't you actually at least have a conversation with them? So I did. And that was, gosh, I don't know, 16, 17 years ago now.
Wow.
And I've been at the ISF ever since. And so it was purely by chance. I didn't sort of move into security. And my lens, if you like, that I have always viewed it is through that sort of so what from a business standpoint,
Yeah.
rather than trying to get into the sort of nuts and bolts of it. And so that's why I sort of, you know, claim that I don't know much about security because I don't have a traditional route
No.
into it.
Mm.
And my perspective has always been, well, what's it mean for the business? How can we demonstrate business value? Why should people be interested in security? And that, I think, in the early days certainly was sort of formed by the fact that, as I said, when I was doing M&A, you know, the last thing we would do would be to go near anyone in security because they'd stop the deal happening. So we
And
wanted
so,
as way as possible.
so EY, is that Ernst and Young?
Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting because people don't think of accountants as being involved in security, but you know, many years ago when I worked in the high risk security industry, I worked with Deloitte and Touche, and so
All
I
right.
expected when I went into it, I thought they're not going to do what's this, but they do a lot of risk work, and of course we were involved with data centers and things like that, and protecting information. So I get where it's coming from, and people don't realize that in the financial industry, this is a big problem: security and intelligence and risk analysis that goes with it, especially in mergers and acquisitions. Have you? Now you said you've been doing this for many years, and what changes have you seen? Dramatic changes? Because I mean, things have changed. I think in the last couple of years dramatically with it, and we'll talk about that in a bit. You know, introduction to AI. How dramatic has been the change from when you entered to where it is now?
I think when I entered, it was probably still very much a bits and bytes type environment. We were still
Mm.
talking a lot about governance structures that were probably not fully formed. We didn't have the same level of interest in it from certainly from regulators, legislators, that kind of thing. We had no concept of things like, you know, GDPR, for instance,
Oh
and
yeah,
that's a massive
huge.
change. So it was still sort of very fledgling. I think, as I would say, over the last sort of COVID was real turning point, I think, for the industry because suddenly, pretty much overnight, we had to move to an environment where we're protecting data that's not within the strict confines of the organization.
Yeah,
So it's going to be in people's homes. It was going to be used by people where you had no control over it at all. And so we had to adapt as an industry to that. And I think that was actually very good for us. And then obviously bringing it bang up to date now, you know, as you've just mentioned, we've got things like AI. We've got a much, much better understanding in the boardroom of the value of data, not just within the company, but to other people who may want to exfiltrate it, steal it, fiddle with it, do whatever with it for their own good. And so I think we've moved from being quite a technically focused space. And typically, you know, you would have people moving into that from
mm,
IT. They would move in perhaps from the police force and the military, that kind of thing,
yeah,
into it being something that is much, much more business related today. That's not to say that we've, you know, done away with all of that technical aspect, but the relevance, the
yeah.
need for business resilience, you know, those are the sorts of things that people are now much more excited about than they were before, because I think you could probably get away with things a little bit more in the past.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of eh, and for education coming from intelligence work, intelligence services that are bringing in. You've got the technological, you've got geospatial, you've got human intelligence. There's so
Mhm.
much that's coming into it now. It's gone beyond it just being a guy with a computer and trying to identify. There's a whole gamut of it. You in one of your podcasts, one of your interviews, you were talking about the change in paradigm in 226, the emerging threats. And
Mm.
I'd like to talk a little bit about those emerging threats and what they kind of mean in the legal industry, because as you know, in the financial industry is very sensitive, but I don't think the legal industry is ready for it. I don't think the legal industry, from what I see, understands the potential of these emerging threats in the cases and the data and analysis that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Mm. Yeah, I think the legal profession is always a very interesting one. I'm sort of reminded of conversations I had probably going back, I don't know, 6, 7 years with partners in that space where they had got very excited about being able to store matters in the cloud, for instance,
Yeah.
but hadn't really thought through the security implications of that. So they saw the benefit of being able to access it, from all areas, whenever they wanted to, but hadn't actually sort of joined the dots that actually that was very valuable information and they needed to protect it. Well, to what degree do you then take it? How are you going to manage that security element, if you like? Because one of the things that again is a characteristic of the security space at the moment is the fact that it's very fast moving.
Yeah.
Legislation, regulation is not. It's very slow moving.
No, the bureaucracy behind it's crazy just to
Absolutely.
get something changed.
Exactly. So you've got this cultural mismatch.
Yeah.
So I think it's been quite difficult for some in the legal profession to make that change, make that leap, if you like. They can see benefit, but they don't fully understand perhaps how culturally they need to change. I think that is evolving. I think certainly AI has done wonders for that. But if anything of data has value, you need to be absolutely certain as to how you are protecting it and who is able to access it. And that really then filters through the whole way in which you manage your data estate. And we talk a lot at the ISF about protecting the crown jewels. Well, in the legal environment, those crown jewels are changing on an ongoing basis, depending on which case you're looking at. Everything potentially has value if you're bringing it
Yeah.
to the court. Otherwise, you're not going to use it, right? So why would you store it? And so I think there are a number of sort of changes that the legal profession has to go through. And again, it's a bit like financial services space. You mentioned this. If I look at the banks, if I look at fintech, they've got
Yeah.
a massive, massive advantage over some of the legacy banks because they're able to start with a relatively blank sheet of paper. So they can implement a number of those things already, whereas some of the larger organizations in the banking space, of course, will have multiple legacy systems that they've got to try to work through. And legal is not different from that perspective.
Ladies and gentlemen, before you get back into the episode, I have a huge ask. Below, there's going to be a link, and if you click that link, it's going to take you to a page, and that page is about the Ryan Larkin Invitational Adventure Race. It has been set up by a foundation, 62 Romeo Sleep Foundation, and I have a colleague of mine that's taking part in this race. It is a race that is going over 62 miles over 3 days in Colorado in June, and we're raising funds to support this excellent cause. We've lost many veterans to suicide. The numbers are just astronomical. One veteran to suicide is enough. The numbers that we get on a daily basis is exploding. And so we have organizations like this that are now trying to combat veteran suicide, supporting veterans when they come back from duty and they fight an even greater war. And the 62 Romeo project is run by a gentleman by the name of Rob Sweetman, and he is developed the Sleep 101 program for first responders and veterans, law enforcement, and it's phenomenal. And this Ryan Larkin Adventure Race is also in memory of Ryan Larkin, who was a Navy SEAL. And so please support this organization, support this race, and especially support my friend that is in Team Relentless. Team Relentless is the team that's going forward to the race. It is a race, as I said, over 3 days, 62 miles, and each team, there's 10 teams, and each team will be taking part on tests, strategic tests that I don't even know what's going to happen over them, but these are going to be military tests that they're going to do over this period of time, helping to test them to the resilience, their skills, their adaptability, and also their team resilience, the team building as well. So please support this phenomenal cause. Support Team Relentless by offering your donation today to support veterans. I'm a fellow veteran. I support all veterans. Please join me in supporting veterans, no matter whether you're a British veteran like me or whether you're an American veteran. We're all brothers and sisters in arms, and we all support one another. So please click the link below, go to the page and support Team Relentless, who will be taking part in the Ryan Larkin Invitational Adventure Race in June. And those dates and everything about that will be underneath. Let's get back to the show. God bless. There's a lot of law firms and partners in the law firms. They don't realize that there's such a high value target for criminal infiltration and ransomware and all sorts of things. What kind of risks do you think then? What is the change in emerging risk that law firms are missing because they're prime targets? Is it across the board, litigation, mergers and acquisitions, or why are they becoming prime targets?
I think it is across the board. I think that there is immense value in, if you look, let me step back. If you look at the legal profession, they probably rely more heavily on data than some of the other industries that are out there. Now, we can debate whether or not that's the case, but I would certainly say that because you're using it
I
in
would
the
agree.
court to achieve something, right?
Yeah.
One of the things I've always been bothered about with data protection is not somebody actually exfiltrating or stealing the data. I've always been more worried about somebody just going in there and changing it slightly. And so then you make decisions based on flawed data.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And that's a concern for me because, if you look at the average time that an attacker spends on your network, they could be there 90 days, 120 days, 180 days. They're gleaning a tremendous amount of information. They're watching how you behave. They're not involved in smash and grabs. Certainly some are, but the very serious
There's a
ones are.
long-term surveillance going on.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that's how they can cause the most damage. You then have this challenge over deepfakes. Every senior individual is aware of that, should be aware of that. Doesn't matter if you're a partner, if you're a chief executive, if you're a finance director. Again, if you have a position of authority, people will want to try to, exfiltrate some data, perhaps replicate your voice. And it's very easy to do. Very
It's
easy.
actually scary how easy it is to do. I remember when you asked me that question, and I don't know if I answered it right, but I kind of thought about it afterwards, and I was like, from my other point of view in what we talked about, I realized there was a lot more to it. And so I started looking into it a lot more after our conversation. I thought, this is really, really scary. And I thought about this in the legal industry because I had seen a case where someone had replicated a voice.
Right.
And so easy and exfiltrated information, actually stole money, not from a law firm, but just from an individual. And I think to myself, and this goes back to what you're saying, somebody inside changes something. If they create a space that somebody can get in, then the damage from the inside happens because they've opened the door. And I think about how many people inside a law firm, the legal industry and the financial industry, in massive business, they're even dealing with lawyers, corporate lawyers. You could have a deep fake that replicates someone's voice, image. I mean, it's scary.
It is
How
scary.
damaging this can be.
No,
what do we
absolutely.
do to stop it?
Yeah, and the big issue for me around it, you see, is reputational damage.
Massive.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that is incredibly difficult to unpick. If you
Yeah.
lose data, okay, fine. But reputational damage, and the thing, the good thing or the bad thing, depending on how you want to look at it, about the internet is once it's out there, it's out there. You can
That's
do
right.
your
You
best to take
can't
things
get it.
down. It's out there. And so I think a lot more focus needs to be on how you manage reputational risk within these sorts of firms where typically, if you look at lawyers, corporates will want to work with a particular firm. They may
Yes.
want to work with a particular partner. There's immense reputational value and therefore potential damage involved in all of this. So we're in an environment where you really do need to be exceptionally careful about how you manage your personal profile, how you manage personal data, how you really behave, I would say, online. And that for some people is quite a difficult one to get your head around.
It is. It's funny. I had a conversation with a lawyer recently, small law firm,
Mhm.
and I was chatting to them about this, the whole idea of how they should be taking their cybersecurity seriously. And the thing that was said to me was, John, we're such a small firm. Why would they even bother? And immediately I got red flags coming everywhere.
Yep.
And this is what I'm seeing in the industry. They think they're small enough that they're not going to be targeted. That's a bit of an illusion, wouldn't you say?
I would. I would. If I look at some of the breaches that have taken place and the attacks have taken place, they're not necessarily on the very large firms, because some of the large firms are spending the money, are putting in place some of the defenses that are required.
Yeah, they are.
They're going after lower hanging fruit, which is the smaller guys. They don't have perhaps um, the resources in place to
Yeah.
put some of these things. Then perhaps making do with the basic level. But if they're working with other firms, if they're working with large corporate clients, they may not even be the target. They just may be the route into the
Yeah.
organization that they're working with. So I think that the days of I'm too small to get noticed are pretty much gone now.
Yeah.
Um, if you're working in any way, shape, or form with data online, you're a potential target, and you have to adopt that mindset.
I also think, and I think this is a bit of a misnomer really, because I see a lot of cyber professionals saying, protect your data, protect your data. Anything can be found out about you. And then I know from dealing with other people in the security world that, like, your data's out there. Once it's out there, they know everything about you anyway. It's not
Yeah,
about protecting your data, it's about managing the risk.
yeah, it
And
is.
go.
It is about managing the risk, and I think it's about having a mindset that says, at some point in time, irrespective of what I do, I could be attacked. How
Yeah.
am I going to respond? So it's moving, and this is one of the shifts in the industry. It's moving from this notion that I can protect everything to the notion that I can't protect everything. So in that environment, I have to spend my time thinking about how I'm going to recover, how I'm going to minimize the impact of any particular attack on me personally or on my organization, and really starting to put in place some of the processes, some of the ways in which you're going to recover, and then rehearsing those,
Yeah.
because you have to do that before an attack takes place. It's too late then. You have to be prepared. And you hope, of course, that it's not going to happen. And therein lies the rub as well. Because if you've been doing this for a number of years and you think, do you know what? I haven't been attacked. Why am I
Yeah.
doing it? Why am I doing it? Wasted time. I'll give myself a year off.
Yeah, I've seen that in the industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I spent all this time, all this money, and nobody attacked me. Well, good for you. You've got to ask yourself, though, why didn't they attack you? Was
Yeah.
it because you made yourself look unattractive? I always say to people, you want to try to make yourself look like that guy in the bar who's down the end of it, drooling into his beer, and he is the last person you want to go near. That's
Yeah.
what you're trying to do,
I
because
love
you
that.
you want the attacker to go to lower hanging fruit, somebody who is
Yeah.
easy to go after. So you want to make yourself look really unattractive.
And I think and that's the problem in the legal industry, is because they don't want to be unattractive. They want to be attractive, and that therein lies the problem. And the other thing is that I think they also, and I've seen this, is they'll go, well, I would rather spend my budget
Mm.
on Google advertising than I would separate part of that budget for the security? And you mentioned something that I think is important for the legal professionals out there. And bearing in mind that legal professionals are working in mergers and acquisitions, they're working with big companies. You said something like, yeah, you want to be unattractive. They may be trying to do a smash and grab or get information or ransomware. But here's the thing: what if they're surveilling you? What
Mhm.
if you're the legal firm and you don't even know that you're being surveilled digitally
Yep.
over a long period of time? So how can we mitigate that risk? Because we're protecting, we're closing doors, we're closing potential weak points in the system, and then maybe internally. But how do we identify? Do we just take it? Do the legal firms say, "Okay, we're being surveilled anyway. Let's just agree on that"?
Yeah. I think that's not a bad going in position, to be honest. I think you have to assume if you're doing anything of value, right,
Mm,
then you have to assume that somebody is going to be interested. And that changes the way in which you then think about things. And
yeah,
a lot of this, of course, that we're talking about is a culture change. You
yeah,
can have the finest, you can spend an absolute fortune putting in software and goodness knows what else. Ultimately, the vast majority of attacks that take place come via people doing things that they perhaps shouldn't do. Clicking on something without thinking about it that downloads ransomware, that then off we go. Sharing information that perhaps they shouldn't have done, maybe for good reason. My corporate network is down. I've got to get this information across to a client. I'll use my personal website, my personal email.
yeah.
No, it's about causing people to actually step back and just think for a minute before they actually click. And we can do a lot more if we focus on our online behavior, about the way in which we view digital assets, and just think a little bit more about how we access, how we share that information. And if it looks fishy, it probably is.
Hi, if you are a legal expert or an expert witness and you would like to join our exclusive legal community, then connect with me on Help Lawyer and let's have a conversation. And I think also, Steve, in let's take a criminal case or something like that as well, people don't realize how, in your mind, you may put something online that's very simple. It could be an image of you at a restaurant or wherever, and they don't realize that that one image is given so much background intelligence you don't even know. And so if you're working for a law firm or a big company, you have to get into the mindset that what I do, no matter what I do, is going to be surveilled. No matter what I put out there, what can they find out about me? And does this cause a risk to my company or even the people in the company? Because you know as well as I do, one image,
Mhm.
one voice message, anything, anywhere. It's so scary how someone can get your information so
Yeah.
easy. Like I think about sitting in Starbucks. And the minute I get into Starbucks, straight away VPN comes on. I try to cover. I know that that's just a panacea for the pain because if anybody really wants to get in, they can. But it is so scary there. And if you're eh, dealing with any kind of data, I think we need to even go beyond the technology, beyond AI. We'll talk about AI in a minute, but
Mm.
how they're presenting themselves online can actually give somebody information.
Of course they can. And I think one of the other things that perhaps some people don't fully understand is the degree of sophistication of the cyber criminal today. Um,
Scary.
you know, it is. And organized crime has moved into that. We've got nation states backing certain actors. It isn't, that happy-go-lucky cyber criminal sitting in the kitchen with a hoodie, having a play around.
It's
These are
changed.
highly sophisticated
Yeah.
businesses. So if you're a law firm that's working on a fairly major, I don't know, merger or acquisition or anything else for that matter,
Internationally.
internationally, you have to assume that somebody is going to be wanting to make things difficult for you. Um, and I think it's that kind of mentality, understanding
Absolutely.
history is highly sophisticated. And to your point, a lot of your information is already out there.
Absolutely. I know something that you're saying there I think is really important. And I want to take a segue into this before we even talk about AI. In the mergers and acquisitions and the international trade that we deal with, let's just talk about the war. right? Let's talk about Iran. Let's talk about North Korea, China. These are bad actors. These are, as you say, highly sophisticated. And I know in our network, we have 800 odd law firms in our network. I know that there's Middle Eastern law firms that are on there. I know Iranian law firms. I know them from the breadth of across the world. Here's a point now. We're in an age where, yes, the war's going on. We may be reducing their potential military ability, but we're not reducing their potential cyber ability. We know the cyber attacks are increasing. Even from Iran, they're not stupid. They're very intelligent. They know what they're doing. They've got a phenomenal cyber force, as well as North Korea. And people don't think of that danger. We're moving into a world now that is completely different. We're not really putting boots on the ground. We're putting tech and AI into these zones, and that proliferates down to the boardroom.
It does. It does, John. I think that there was a time when we started talking about the change in which war would unfold, and I think there was, for a little while, we said, future wars are going to be entirely cyber based. Well, I think we were wrong. I think that actually it's a combination.
Yeah,
It's still the physical plus the cyber, but you should never underestimate the power of cyber, because to your point, yes, the adversary is probably exceptionally well drilled,
yeah,
but they're going to have proxies out there as well in all sorts of
absolutely.
different parts of the world, and they may well be keeping them hidden. They should be keeping them hidden until they want to bring them back to life. So even if you were to knock out the internet in, let's say, Iran or wherever it happens to be, that's not going to
Exactly.
stop the proxies. And to
Absolutely.
assume that they haven't planned for that is absolute madness.
And I think people don't realize that they're thinking the proxies are people that are maybe going to, like back in the day when I was in the military and we were dealing with the IRA, we were worried about them planting bombs in London. We had bombs in London. We had explosions going off. You remember that? You remember there's
Absolutely.
all that. But we're going beyond that now. We're not having terrorist cells that are operating just on that physical side. You're right. We have proxies that are cyber. They don't need to be in Iran. We probably got them here in the US and the UK. China has just opened up a massive embassy in London, huge one. And I'm sure they're going to have cyber proxies all over.
Absolutely. And, governments around the world, just it doesn't matter who you want to pick, need to wise up to this. I mean, you can't. And that will require investment, certainly in the security services. The security services, particularly in the UK and the US, I say, do a pretty good job.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
stretched pretty thin. They're stretched pretty thin. And governments need to wake up to the fact that the world has changed. But we're back into that culture change. We're back into the speed at which these things, can be brought about and changed. But I think raising that level of awareness that this is not simplistic. This is hugely complex, and attacks on things like critical infrastructure. I mean, hopefully this won't happen, but we've obviously, certainly from a European standpoint, we're headed towards a crisis from an oil perspective.
Absolutely, yeah.
We can produce some of that. If you look at what the Norwegians are doing and various other countries, they're producing their own gas and oil and what have you. An attack on critical infrastructure in that space would be devastating.
Absolutely.
It isn't just about whether or not you can get your tanker through the Strait of Hormuz.
No,
It's
it's
about
not.
how are you stepping up the protection of critical infrastructure that is nowhere near the Middle East.
People don't appreciate that. And I don't think in the legal industry they appreciate it either, because we're looking at purely something from a strategic physical point of view and not where it actually goes down the line. And how that it can affect not only just the oil, but our power infrastructure or even water. I mean, look at the cyber attacks that happen to imagine them shutting down or causing problems in the water that we have, which that could be devastating for the whole of the world. And so they're not looking at this. And I think here's the other problem is the development of AI. Where do you see that in everything that we're talking about? Because AI is changing dramatically, but are we really ready for the potential cyber flaws that are happening now and probably going to develop even further. Not from just a government point of view or any operation, anything that's happening in the Strait of Hormuz or North Korea or any of these bad actors, but from there right down to the individual sitting in the boardroom or the lawyer sitting at his desk.
Yeah, I think that with AI, it's interesting. A lot of the general sort of focus on AI has centered around, and it's moved fairly quickly as well. I teach a course at Henley Business School with board directors there, and when I first started talking about AI, probably I don't know about 3-4 years ago, most people were thinking about it as Chat GPT
I know.
because that's what it was, right?
Yeah.
Um, Now, of course, there's a much broader understanding of what AI actually is, what it can do. And we've moved into, oh, it's going to take jobs away. And we've seen lots of redundancies being made and that kind of thing. Yes, it may well be impacting that kind of thing. But it's also, to your point, being used by cyber criminals
Yeah.
to speed up the efficiency of their attack. There isn't much evidence at the moment that AI itself is being involved in conducting the attack. It's more about the preparatory work before the attack happens. So playing the sort of the what if scenarios, looking for opportunities to infiltrate networks, that kind of thing. And the good news is that from a cyber industry standpoint, of course, we have access to these tools as well.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that does, uh, I suppose, puzzle me, I suppose, rather than keep me up. I don't tend to be kept up at night, but it does puzzle me. Is what is going to be the impact of AI going up against AI? That's something that I really do sort of noodle over from time to time.
I've
And you
thought about that.
like,
I've thought about that because I think about the big thing at the moment, everybody's talking about open claw. And I
yep,
even see lawyers talking about open claw. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, I've got a good setup here. I could probably run it. And then I thought, wait a minute, this is potentially a security nightmare because I mean, I've got NAS systems here and various other things. And I think I've done pretty well in securing it.
mm,
But that is scary because then I look at Claude and Claude saying, we now have an agent that can work within your browser and I
yep,
see lawyers jumping on and say, "My God, Claude is amazing. It's cutting down our time. We're doing this. It's working as an agent." And I think, wait a minute, what if Claude starts to go against OpenClaw, and what if these agents are starting to compete because they're and at the end of the day, here's the way I think about it, and I might be wrong. No matter what AI is doing, there's a human intelligence, there's a human aspect to it because it only does what human interprets or what a human being puts in. And the data that it's picking up is from humans. So we still have to go right back to the individual and to learn their modus operandi, how they operate, how they think about bad actors, criminals. But it is scary. I have thought exactly the way that you're thinking, Steve, is what if AI goes up against AI? Are we screwed?
exactly. And the other thing I think you mentioned lawyers getting very excited about being able to use Claude or whoever it might be. That's fine, but they still have to do the validation checks
Yeah,
because what if Claude has picked up some erroneous data? What if Claude has had some of the data that it's feeding off be slightly changed? To my earlier point, and has created data that is then being picked up again and reused. So
yeah,
for me, when we talk about AI, I think the best outcome for AI is the human working collaboratively with
yeah,
the tool, right? No doubt you can get things done a lot quicker. You can
yeah,
get to certain points, but that doesn't mean that you stop validating and switch off, the brain. You need to be looking at these things and saying, okay, does that actually make sense?
yeah.
And questioning. And I think the assumption that because it's AI, somehow it must be absolutely right. No, it's not at that point yet. My personal hope is that it never gets to that point. Whether or not we'll wait and see, right?
Yeah, that could be a bit dodgy. It's getting there. It's getting close.
It is. And I think that is then we get into some real problems because as soon as you tell somebody that they can switch off because the machine's doing it for them, how do you begin to differentiate?
It's
How do you
difficult because I see that it sometimes makes its own decisions.
Yep.
Just even in a simplified thing, if I was, you know, developing a document and I have and I put something in, I'm utilizing it, and it's particular, and then it will say, "Well, I see a better way of doing this." Oh, actually, and you look at it and you're like, "I never asked you to add that in. Why
Hmm.
did you add that?" It takes away the whole context, and so it does seem to make up its own mind as well. And I think that is another risk. So someone who's not a cyber professional could erroneously be missing this information, this change that's happening, and that creates a whole cyber problem. Do you think that in the industry, maybe in the cybersecurity industry and further down, do you think that there needs to be training in a level of situational awareness?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't
Does it
think you're ever going
exist
to get away
yet
from that.
now or not?
Um, I think it continually evolves, and I
Mm,
think that the mistake perhaps that some people make is that it's a once and done, and that's not the
yeah.
case. For me, it's a bit like compliance. And I go back to when I was at EY, and we used to have to do these compliance things, every year. And you fill in the compliance thing, and you know full well it's a checkbox exercise. And the goal is to pass the test so that you can continue to practice, right? Do you remember much of it? Probably not.
No.
Um, and that is the danger. And so whenever I talk about compliance, I always say that, good security will result in good compliance. Compliance will not necessarily result in good security. And it's the same with situational awareness. You have to keep reinforcing, you have to make it relevant, you
Yeah.
have to keep updating, and you have to keep looking at how the individual is reacting to that so that you can improve. So it's an ongoing thing. And I think that is one of the biggest changes in security that we've seen. It's no longer something where you could produce a policy, you can produce a set of compliance standards and leave it. It's now living and evolving, and it's something that needs to keep monitored on an ongoing basis because it does directly impact the way in which a business develops, the decision making that you know executives are involved in, and the way in which we actually go forward and hopefully run better businesses that deliver value.
Steve, I totally agree with you, but I don't see it coming down the line because the cybersecurity professionals are changing. They're developing. They're constantly keeping up to date. But if we go into the boardroom, or I speak to any lawyer and I'd start talking to them about their security policies, not that I'm an expert or anything, but just
Yeah,
in passing, they don't seem to know about it. They don't have a situational awareness. I don't see that it's happening at a corporate level. There's a small group of security professionals that are looking after the whole company. But where is the education for the person who's just using the computer or the online? Because it's like, don't do this, but know why. How
yeah,
does that happen? Here's how a bad actor may operate. I don't see that happening. I don't see it happening in the legal industry.
yeah. And I think you've hit on a really important point. Security, I think, in certain industries, legal being one, is still viewed as being a cost.
Oh, God, yeah. They won't spend on it.
They won't spend on it, or they'll minimize the spend because they
Totally.
could use it somewhere else. And that is the real challenge, I think. We have to move it from being cost to value. How are you delivering value in this? And we have to do that in a positive way as opposed to a negative way, because it's no good saying to a lawyer, if you spend X amount of dollars, pounds, euros, whatever it happens to be, you may not be attacked. Well, that's great. Prove it. Again, you have to think about the mindset of the person that you're talking to, right?
Exactly.
And that's one of the things that traditionally security has not been good at because it's come from this technical space that I've been talking about. Increasingly, the best security leaders that are starting to come into the space have very strong interpersonal skills. They
Yeah.
understand empathy. They are able to get some of these messages across in a way that they understand. And that means you have to tailor it to the environment that you're in. And what I've always done is I've always tried to pick the most, particularly when we're talking about partnerships, I've tried to go for the partner that really has the least possible time and interest. Because all the other partners sit around and watch, and you try to convert that individual. If you can come up with
Right.
some form of value for that individual, then in my experience, the rest of them just flood through and follow. Because, if Joe can see the value, my God, there must
Yeah,
be.
it's that domino effect, isn't it? If he's
It
not
is.
interested, but you can convince him,
Yeah.
it's like going into the boardroom. You say, look, if you can convince George because he's the hardest guy to
Yeah,
deal with, then we're all in.
exactly. That's absolutely right. But it's not for the faint-hearted.
No.
It really isn't. And it does require a fairly detailed understanding of how the legal profession works, of what constitutes value for them, and then adapting the security posture to that so they can see that there's some inherent value in adopting the different approaches that you're talking about.
I think you hit on something earlier that you talked about the reputation. Personally, I believe that lawyers are more interested in their reputation than anyone, right? Because that's a big thing in the legal industry. There's laws for it. I mean, there's certain things they can't say online. They're involved in a case. They may say something very innocuous, but actually can cause a problem in an investigation. So I think maybe that is the gateway. Maybe that is the stepping stone that we use to say, reputation, cybersecurity, all of this is one. It is not a separate issue.
Yes. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you lose your reputation as a lawyer, you're pretty much finished.
You're done.
Pretty much finished. You need to look for something else to do.
And it's scary how they're utilizing AI to cut their corners and their time with very little knowledge of the security implications.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. AI is immensely powerful. You need to treat it with respect and with care.
What
And
do you think are the biggest problems in the legal industry at the moment in terms of even with AI and with the security? What are they missing?
I think I'd go back to that understanding of the value of security in
Yeah.
the day job. Because I think that all too often, no, not all firms, I mean, it's easier to sit here, isn't it, for us to sort of, paint sort of broad brush pictures. And not all firms are like this, but in the majority, I would say, particularly when we start to look at the small to mid-size as well, there hasn't been that sort of light bulb moment that says, you know what, we need to make sure that we can implement security around all of this because that means we can protect our reputation and because that means we can use some of these tools effectively, yes, to produce better case notes, be better prepared, and so on. And I think that's the real essence of it. But it's about bringing security and making it look like another useful tool that helps the lawyer move forward more
Yeah.
quickly, more effectively than his or her counterpart.
They can see it as something that the value goes way beyond what they have and their perception. They have to change their perceptions, change their whole perception of it, and to see this value, because at the moment they're all fighting about cost. And I find it, like I said, I find it sad that they would rather put money into Google ads. And I've said to a lawyer friend of mine as well, but you may be on a case that is involved with a lot of money at stake, and one data risk can collapse that whole case. And you just think by having a VPN you're sorted, which you don't. And I think there's a lot to be said for training and changing their perceptions.
Yeah. And I think that some of that around is also around some of the cost.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily cost a huge amount of money to implement some of these things. There is this sort of illusion, if you like, I think that it all has to be hugely expensive. It doesn't. There are some basic things that can be done that are not massively expensive, particularly when you're talking about the legal profession, because the legal profession, as we all know, is pretty well known for some of the fees that they tend to charge, and that's fine.
Don't get me on that. That's another episode.
When you look at it within the context of that, that's the piece as well that they need to think through.
So let's give them some tips, Steve. What tips could you give them? What would you say to them? A small law firm who's listening to this and they're like, you know what, Steve, you've got a point. I need to think about this. I haven't. What can they do now to begin that and to have a process where they're ready to go, I can scale it if I need to?
Yeah, I think the first thing they have to do is really understand how they're using data. maybe sound very simplistic, but how are they actually using it? How dependent are they upon it? Because if they can answer that question, then very quickly they're going to see that they need to do something about it.
Mm.
But for me, they have to sort of opt in, if you like. And I think all too often they're scared by it, or they think, oh, it's going to, we're going to go into this whole technical realm. No, just take some very basic look at how am I using data? If I didn't have access to that data, what impact would it make on my caseload, on how I would be going into court, on how I would be effective, on my reputation? Because now, if you can answer those questions, you're ready to take the next step. Then you move on and you say, okay, now what could I do to protect that? Would I
Yeah.
be implementing things like a VPN? Would I be talking to other people in my legal circle? Would I be talking to, if you're in the UK, would you be talking to someone like, the NCSC? Would you be talking more globally to an organization like my own about some of the basic things that you can put in place? So I think you begin that voyage of discovery, which lawyers are very good at.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you're playing to their strengths. You're giving them information. And they should be thinking, particularly in the small to mid-sized space, they should be thinking about how they're using technology. Where are they storing information? If they're storing it in the cloud, are they backing it up? Are they just putting it all with Amazon Web Services, or are they doing something different? Are they holding it separately? Are they holding it locally? What are they actually doing with the information? In the olden days, of course, it would all be written on paper.
Yeah, that's
Matters to
true. And then it would be in your archive and your
exactly.
metal cabinets. I remember that, the foliage.
Yeah.
Nowadays it's not. But
Right.
here's another thing, though. It's scary how many of them are actually using cloud servers. And they
Yep.
think it's secure, but they don't realize that this is a data center that is also has risk. Is there is it a better viable option for a small law firm to say have their own NAS system, or do
I
you
think it
think that's
depends how much they've invested or prepared to invest. Quite often, if they have got the right kind of contract with a cloud service provider, if you're a small company, then the cloud provider is probably going to have a better level of security, provided, though, John,
yeah
you've opted into it.
yeah that's true
Don't go cheap. Don't go cheap.
yeah
This is really valuable information. Cloud services providers can provide you with high levels of security, but they will charge you for it.
yeah
So that if it's cheap, it probably means it's not giving you the level of protection that you need. So if you don't have the resources in house, yes, I would say outsource them, but you don't outsource responsibility for if and when it goes wrong. So
yeah
you
that's
have
true.
to understand that you're still responsible for that data, irrespective of where you happen to be storing it. And so you may then decide that you want to take some of that data and store it yourself. But that's a
But
business.
it is a business thing, and I kind of want to tidy this episode up. I'm going to get you back on. We'll talk more. Actually, there's so much to talk about. But let's talk about when a breach happens for a law firm
Mm.
in the legal industry. What should they be doing? They've had a breach. Because obviously it could be red team the testing, you're testing the systems. Let's say they find a breach. What is their next step?
Wow. I mean, if a law firm is breached, that is, yeah,
Serious.
I would hope that they have run through their resilience testing beforehand. I would hope that they have run some cyber simulation exercises where they are ready to respond to that kind of thing. If they haven't, I would say they're being negligent. And I would say that their clients would be coming after them for that. There is an
Yeah.
assumption that the client makes that if they're sharing information with their lawyer or their accountant, that those are solid,
Secure.
absolutely solid. And so it's a big, big issue if the law firm is hacked or suffers a breach. So they should have been rehearsing how they will respond to it. They will have to be notifying various regulators. They will have to
Yeah.
follow a certain process. They will have to be looking at how they're going to recover from that in terms of the data. So you would hope that they have backups.
I'm surprised at how many don't.
Yeah. If you think about, let's go back in time, right? When they had their paper matters, they would put them, the really important stuff, they would put in fireproof safes.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah.
So now we've moved into the data world. What's the equivalent? I'll just out with my cloud provider and it'll be good. No problem. Don't worry about it. No, you have to verify. You have to trust. And there may be an instance where actually you need to hold some of that data somewhere else, separate. It's interesting if you look at some of the advice more recently from the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. What they were saying was that if you've got absolutely important information that you can't do without, you may want to consider actually storing it on paper still, because the advantage of paper is it can't be hacked. You can protect it.
Do you know what? I know, honest Steve, I never thought of that, because that is still viable.
Absolutely. So I think that again, I'm not suggesting that all these law firms can pack in their machines and go, right, that's it, back to the quill pen.
Honestly. Oh, no, absolutely not. Steve, it's been awesome having you on. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure that the people in the legal industry throughout the world listening to this is going to help. Let's talk a little bit about ISF and how the ISF can actually help law firms. I don't know if you have a membership for law firms, but if they want to, or they're cyber professionals, talk a little bit about your organization.
We do. I mean, we're a global organization, so we're a membership organization and not for profit. We focus only on information security and risk management. We don't do anything else. And we have members from Australia right the way through to the Americas and all the pieces in between. And our members get access to a whole range of risk tools, policies. They have access to our analysts 24/7 pretty much. We don't charge for that other than the membership fee. And we do have law firms in the membership who get immense value from it. So if anyone listening is interested, then they should just get hold of me on LinkedIn. Is probably the easiest, and be happy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'll have the details down in the show notes and things like that. Steve, thank you for being me in Legal Oil. I really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure we could have got more. I'd love to have you back again at some point so we can discuss it more. I'm sure that the world is going to continue to keep changing. AI is going to keep changing. Cybersecurity is going to keep changing. And I think it's actually an exciting, evolving subject matter that covers all spectrums of the intelligence cycle. So thank you, Steve, for being with me in Legal Oil.
No, it's been a pleasure, Jock. Thanks for having me.
God bless. If you're a lawyer, then I invite you to consider joining our exclusive legal network on Help Lawyer. Just send me a message and we will book a time to have a private conversation together.
You've been listening to The Legal Owl, where law meets the unseen layers of clarity, leadership, and inner alignment. If this sparks something in you, trust that feeling. Let it lead you. For deeper insights, real conversation, and strategic guidance, connect through the Help Lawyer Network and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If you prefer a more private connection, you'll find the path when you're ready. Until next time, stay present, think deeper, and lead wiser.